I want to share while we're getting ready. I feel prompted in my heart to remind you of a couple things. In 2018, and this is so crazy, I had several dreams that I've shared, and those of you that are watching, you can go back to One Voice, OVTV, One Voice TV, and you can look at some of the prophetic pulse where I've talked about some of the dreams that I had, and I didn't understand at the time. But I had one dream in 2018 that was so crazy, and I was ironing some clothes, which I don't iron, and there was wrinkles in the clothing that I was trying to iron out, and I was kind of struggling with it, and I was watching the television, and I was watching the news, and I kept flipping through the news, just kind of seeing what was on, and the news was all saying the same thing. This was 2018, and I know you're going to recognize this dream. And I remember what they were saying. The news was saying the same thing. They were saying, by early projections, President Trump has lost. And this is 2018. This is before 2020. By early projections, he's lost, and they were saying the whole thing. And I'm like, well, how can they say that? It's just like it hasn't even really started, you know? And I was reasoning it out as I was ironing the clothing. And they just kept saying it. And I'm thinking, man, this doesn't seem right. And I ran outside. And it was really dark. The clouds were forming. It was super dark outside. And I was knocking on people's doors. And nobody would come out. They were locked in. They were shut in their homes. I remember we had a shut-in. People were locked in their homes. We went through a season of darkness in our country. But then something happened. I began to get very indignant. Is that a word? Indignant? Yeah. And I went back and I started demanding and knocking, saying, it may be dark, but this thing is not over. And I kept knocking and knocking, and I was very determined about it. And all of a sudden, people began to gather, and they began to gather by the masses. And together, we began to gather outside of this lock-in, and we began to together start knocking on doors, and the crowd just kept growing and growing and growing, to where we finally came, and the darkness all of a sudden started dissipating, and there was this incredible blue sky with the sun shining, and on top of a hill was a huge, like, TV screen. How many of you remember this? And on the TV screen was President Trump, and they had announced that he had come back, and the people began to celebrate. Now, why would God give that to me before 2020? And what does it mean? Well, he was trying to tell us what was coming, and I didn't understand it. There would be what we saw on the TV screens with the news. How many remember the early projections of 2020? There was convincing lead for 45, whether you want to believe it or not. Okay, we went to bed, and Pennsylvania, he was way ahead. Went to bed, and mysteriously in 4 hours, the fake Biden got 600,000 votes. That's never been done in the history of our country by a machine's tally. I was watching all of the machines at the same time on America Stands in Fort Worth back, golly, it must have been, well, yeah, it would have been 2020. And I remember looking at them all going, man, it looks like a lottery machine, because the networks could not keep up with one another as we were watching it unfold. All right, go back to the dream. What happened? There was a lock-in. People were shut in their doors. But then they were being awakened, and they were coming out, and the masses were growing. You know what I believe that is where we're at right now. People who've had enough of the stupidity and the evil and the garbage. And but at the end of the tunnel, there was a beautiful day that God was resetting, and there was something that the Lord had done that only He could have done. And I think that's where we're going. I want to talk about one other dream, and I don't know if I've shared this before. Maybe not all of you heard this, but this was on April 9th of this year. And on April 9th of this year, I dreamt about a race, and this is very important that you hear me. when I tell you this. This is a race that I was part of, where President Trump was in a race, car race, and he had a USA car, and there were two other opponents in the race with him. So there was a three-way race. Now, this was in April. There wasn't a three-way race. But how many know it came down to three? And just like what I'm going to tell you in the dream, the race starts, and Trump is so far out in front that they called it. And the other one of the drivers pulled off and basically made a pit stop and started doing interviews to justify, why he was stopping, and then started manipulating it, saying that the rules of the race say that you have to stop, you have to pause, you have to do pit stops. So they were trying to manipulate the race, but it was just, the USA car was so far out in front. So they dropped out of the race. We saw that happen, did we not? The other driver began to pull off and make excuses, started pointing the finger at the USA car, and started, saying that the race rules stated that the USA car with 45 in it, Trump, had to do what all the other drivers were doing. He wasn't racing fairly. Well, the election or the race officials came and they said, look, there's nowhere in the rules that states that in the race that you have to stop and you have to pause. In fact, once the race starts, it's whoever finishes first. Well, it was so strong that President Trump and the USA car was so far out in the lead, the race was over. So they interviewed President Trump and they said, man, what was up? He said, this USA car, he said, I hit the throttle and I had that baby up to 300, and then it started climbing even higher to over 300. And then he said, I backed off, and he goes, and I brought it to the finish, 247 miles per hour into 248 miles per hour. I believe we're going to see that play out. It's already playing out. And so I say that because you don't want to get into fear about things.